Okay, in chapter 6, we start looking at where animals survive. Not just animals, where organisms survive, animals and plants. And so the first thing we need to look at is a habitat. And so a habitat is simply the area in which both the physical and biological environmental, so we're looking at physical and biological um, environmental factors are. That's what a habitat is. Okay, so a habitat is some type of area or regions, and it includes all of the physical and biological environmental factors that allows organisms to live. Now the challenge with that is not all organisms live in the entire habitat. They can live on certain things. So for example, if you look at a redwood forest, it's a massive forest, which the redwoods might consider that the entire habitat, and they have a shared fungal bed, but the insects that live on one tree don't really experience the entire habitat. So we can actually look at the habitat and break it also down into micro habitats. That would be just the tree itself and the environmental factors of the tree, and the fact that maybe with the leaves you get an abundance of dew that forms, or there's a water source, or there's other organisms that live there that they interact. And so this is still going to be an area of physical, biological, environmental factors, but it's not what we consider the entire large biome. A biome is a region that has the shared ones. We tend to look at microhabitats and microbiomes that are created. And this is because most organisms don't really extend and reach past it. The key on even any habitat all comes out to being what type of tolerance those creatures have. Tolerance are the conditions that an organism can survive. We live in California, and we are surviving the fact that we have limited rain right now. We have a tolerance. It's not immediately destroying us. We have, most of you have been around, we've been trying to plant water-tolerant plants, or drought-tolerant plants, depending on which company is selling them, but trying to figure out environmental keys, or picking organisms that are more suited to the environmental factors that are there. Everything comes down to having its place, its environment where they kind of are fairly successful. It's niche, or niche, depending on the part of the world you are talking about. The niche is the description of the organism's ability to live. And so the actual definition goes, a species niche includes the range of physical and biological conditions in which it can survive, reproduce, and obtain the nutrients that it needs. So this is the organisms itself. Habitat. Now, the reason why I say this is because organisms don't always stay in one habitat. Mountain lions, they roam a lot. And so they might be in several different habitats, but that would be its niche, or niche. That's where it survives and maintains itself. And the key on this is, how does it get its resources? What resources does it need, and how does it obtain them? And then we'll have to look at the physical aspects. And by physical aspects, we're talking about abiotic factors. Abiotic are non-living factors, so water. How does it obtain water? How does it sustain water? How does it process waste, and basically things that aren't dealing with other living organisms around it? And then the biological aspects is how it deals with other living things around it, predation, finding food, resources in that way. These are going to, so abiotic would be more like nutrients and water and other life interactions. Prey, predation, living things essentially that you have. All of this really comes down to, no matter what habitat you're in, is competition. And so when we started looking at competition, we did have, I was seeing if they attached the name to it, the competitive depends on it. Exclusionary or exclusion principle. I'm looking at it again because it was, we used to call it by the name of the individual who discovered it, but needless to say, this says this. The competitive exclusion principle says no two species can occupy the same niche at the same time. If two creatures are trying to occupy the same area and same resources and physical aspects and biological ones, one is going to outcompete the other one and therefore survive, and the other one is not. That's it. That's what the competitive exclusionary one is. And so that's the key to this. And so what are we looking at with it? One, how do we divide the resources up? How do organisms, even similar ones, they're trying to occupy the same niche, how do they get the resources? How do they get that? The other big aspects, and we'll have to drop this down, is how they influence each other. And so the influences that we see have to do with predation and actually even herbivory. This one doesn't get talked about much. Most people are like, oh yeah, so there's a bunch of coyotes eating rabbits, the rabbit population is affected because there's coyotes. Well, because coyotes were eating so well, more coyotes came about, and now we have more coyotes eating more rabbits. And then the rabbit population is so low that the coyotes didn't have food, so they started starving. That's competition, and coyotes competing against other coyotes. Herbivory also kicks in. You have range creatures. If you look at any large herd, whether it's buffalo, bison, antelope, they have to roam. The reason why is large herds eat so much they can't stay in it because they affected the plant life population in the region that they're there, affecting what plants can grow, how much they can grow, and size limitation. If you don't believe me, the next time they put the goats up on the hill, just go check them out. Check them out. We have a herd of goats that is based out of Calabasas that's used for plant control. And they release it in a hopefully sealed area, although they've escaped a couple times, and the goats eat everything inside of an hour. They decimate the plants in that time, which is what they're going for, but still, it does affect what can grow in a certain place at any one time. And this competition and all the facts and what we understand, we have been checking out the simple aspect of there could be a keystone species. Most of you are in building or rock building in that way, but this is a term keystone was like the central pin stone, like everything is based on it. If you remove the keystone, the entire structure would fall. And so that's where this term keystone comes from. And so a keystone species plays essentially a vital and unique role in maintaining, structure, stability, and diversity. In an ecosystem. We've actually identified a lot of keystone species. One of the biggest ones that we'll talk about, and you should know, is the otter. Unfortunately, otters were extremely hunted for a while because they had really waterproof coats that were warm and looked really nice, and they were so easy because they kind of just hung by the coast and floated and slept in the kelp beds right on the surface. Needless to say, we hunted them down to almost nothing. The challenge is they eat sea urchins. Without the otters, the sea urchin population went bananas. It went exponential growth, and there was millions and millions of sea urchins. Sea urchins eat kelp. The kelp beds actually make our own internal environment in the ocean where it's not just bottom and top. It made structure for a huge number of species of fish and other organisms to hide and survive in. Well, with the sea urchins eating the roots of that. Okay, so the otter is identified as a keystone species. The otter devours sea urchins, and unfortunately we hunted them down to almost extinction. And what happened then is the sea urchins, they increased their numbers to thousands upon thousands. Sea urchins eat kelp. In fact, the roots of the kelp. And so if you've been to the beach in that long, bulbous, leafy kelp, which is a brown algae, the longest brown algae on the planet, if you've seen that wash ashore, it gets torn up through storm and wave action, or sea urchins eat the roots and unearth it, essentially. The challenge with it, if you lose all the kelp was sustaining an immense number of creatures and fish because it made habitat that's not just bottom and top and like empty water. It made protection areas. It was a kelp forest where things can hide, ambush, and basically survive in the ocean there. And so when we killed all the otters, the kelp became endangered because the sea urchins did. And when that became in danger, all the creatures depending on it went away. So we have protected the otter, and they've rebounded. And an otter can eat over 100 sea urchins a day. And so with the otter rebounding, we quickly got our kelp forests back, and the organisms surviving on them have rebounded pretty severely. All that because this one creature was sustaining that environment. And no other creature was doing that. So that is a keystone species. Other types of relationships that we see is symbiosis. And symbiosis is the fact that creatures relate to each other. They interact by nature. And the question is, what kind of relationship are we talking about? And so we have three types of symbiotic relationships: commensalism, mutualism, and parasitism. Commensalism is real simple. One benefits. The other one doesn't care. Some ants live on trees. The tree does not care that ants are on the tree. If these ants aren't eating the tree, it doesn't make a difference to it. In fact, even if it is, usually it's such a minor removal of leaf, it doesn't affect it at all. And so one benefits, one does not. And so the ants might find food there, they might just get protection, they're both fine. Mutualism. Mutualism, both benefit. A great example of that is there are some hermit crabs that will put a sea anemone on the back of their shell. Now they're both benefiting. Here's how. The crab gets protection from predators because it has a stinging organism on its back that deters things from eating it. And the sea anemone gets to move around to new food sources and not get stuck on a tide pool or a rock where food is just randomly brought. In fact, the crab itself eating particles get kind of kicked up, and the sea anemone can eat those particles. So they both benefit. Another example, a human one, is you have bacteria living in your gut. Okay, that bacteria helps you break down food. It's actually one of the main causes of the methane that you produce, depending on the food source that you're putting into the bacteria. food broken down and sustained in your body better. The bacteria is protected, has an environment to live, and you feed it. Nice job. Parasitism, that's where one benefits and the other is harmed in some way. A great example of that is a mosquito. So female mosquitoes come and suck your blood. So they benefit because now they have blood to feed their babies. That's why they're doing it, by the way. And you get a bite and lose blood. Now around here, we do have mosquitoes. We actually have a new type of mosquito that's coming into the area that's very aggressive and attacks during the day, which is not very exciting, but not that big of a deal. There are some places, Greenland, I believe it is a place where there's reindeer that live on top of the little hills and they come down to feed on grass, but they can't be there the whole time because there's so many mosquitoes that take so much blood that they can actually die of blood loss. And so they have to come down for an hour at a time until they can't stand anymore, then they go back up where it's too cold for the mosquitoes or too windy for the mosquitoes to be. And so that is an example of parasitism in which one benefits and the other does not. If you have questions, please ask. Good luck.